The last time Brianna Walsh had agreed to something this absurd, she had been 8 years old and convinced she could train her neighbor's cat to fetch. She stared at her best friend across the coffee-stained table of their favorite downtown cafe, wondering if Carmen had finally lost her mind. "Let me get this straight," Brianna said slowly, setting down her latte. "You want me to pretend to be some billionaire's girlfriend at a charity gala this weekend because his grandmother is threatening to cut him out of the family foundation if he doesn't settle down?" Carmen nodded enthusiastically, her dark curls bouncing. "Yes, and before you say no, he's offering $10,000 for one evening. 10,000, Brie. That's your rent for almost a year." Brianna's mouth went dry. She taught 3rd grade at an underfunded public school in Brooklyn, and $10,000 was not a sum she could easily dismiss. Her apartment building had just announced a rent increase, and her student loans sat on her shoulders like a concrete backpack. Still, the whole thing sounded like the plot of a terrible rom-com. Why me? Surely a billionaire can find his own fake girlfriend. "Because you're real," Carmen said. "You're genuine and warm, and his grandmother will actually believe he'd fall for someone like you. Plus, my cousin works for his company and recommended you when he was desperately asking around. He doesn't want some actress or model who might leak the story to the press. He needs someone trustworthy and normal." Normal. The word stung a little, but Brianna knew what Carmen meant. She lived a quiet life filled with lesson plans, book clubs, and Sunday morning farmers markets. The most exciting thing that had happened to her in months was successfully growing basil on her fire escape. "What's his name?" "Julian York. He runs York Industries. They manufacture sustainable building materials. He's 32, and from what I hear, actually a decent guy stuck in an impossible situation." Brianna chewed her bottom lip. $10,000. She could finally fix her car, maybe even save some for the summer trip to visit her sister in Portland she had been putting off for 2 years. One evening. You show up, smile pretty, let him introduce you to his grandmother, stay for dinner and dancing, then go home $10,000 richer. He'll have a contract and everything. Completely professional. That was how Brianna found herself standing in front of her bedroom mirror 3 days later, wearing a borrowed emerald green gown that Carmen swore made her eyes look like sea glass. Her blonde hair was twisted into an elegant updo, and she had spent an embarrassing amount of time on YouTube learning how to apply false eyelashes. She looked like a stranger, which was perhaps fitting for the evening ahead. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Brianna grabbed her clutch, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Julian York was not what she expected. She had pictured someone older, perhaps soft around the middle with a receding hairline and the kind of arrogance that came with inherited wealth. Instead, she found herself looking up at a man who could have stepped out of a cologne advertisement. He was tall with dark hair, sharp jawline, and eyes the color of warm honey. He wore his tuxedo like he had been born in it, but there was a tightness around his mouth that suggested he was as nervous as she was. "Brianna Walsh." His voice was deep, professional. "That would be me. Julian York, I presume," he nodded, and for a moment they just stared at each other. Then his expression softened slightly and he held out his hand. "Thank you for doing this. I know it's strange." His handshake was firm and warm. "Strange is one word for it. Shall we go over the story in the car? I have a driver waiting." The car was exactly what she expected. Sleek, black, and probably worth more than she would make in 5 years. The leather seats were butter soft, and there was champagne chilling in a bucket between them. Julian waited until they were pulling into traffic before he spoke. "So here is what my grandmother knows. We met 4 months ago at a fundraiser for literacy programs. You're a teacher, which is true, and I was immediately drawn to your passion for education. We have been dating quietly because you value your privacy and did not want media attention. I have been happier these past few months than I have been in years. That last part is a lie, I assume. He glanced at her, and something flickered in his expression. My grandmother is 78 and has been managing the York Family Foundation since my grandfather died. She's brilliant and fierce, but she has this old-fashioned idea that I need to be settled to truly lead the foundation. My parents died when I was 19, and she's the only family I have left. I can't lose her or her trust. There was real pain in his voice, and Brianna felt her skepticism crack a little. Why not just actually date someone? I've tried. When you're in my position, you never know if someone wants you or your bank account. I've been burned enough times to be cautious. This felt like the safer option, at least until I can convince my grandmother that my relationship status has no bearing on my ability to run a charitable foundation. Brianna studied his profile as streetlights flashed across his face. There was a weariness there, a loneliness she recognized from her own mirror on particularly hard days. Maybe they were not so different after all, just two people trying to navigate impossible expectations. Tell me about her. Your grandmother. Julian's entire demeanor shifted. His shoulders relaxed, and a genuine smile crossed his face. Her name is Eleanor. She's formidable and stubborn and has never met a rule she did not think she could improve upon. She taught me to play chess when I was 6 and never let me win, said it would make me soft. She's been after me to settle down for years, but lately she's been having some heart issues and it's made her more insistent. I think she wants to see me happy before. He did not finish the sentence, but he did not need to. Brianna felt her chest tighten. This was not just about money or foundation politics. This was about a grandson trying to give his grandmother peace. Okay, she said softly. Then let us make this convincing. What else do I need to know? They spent the rest of the drive building their fictional relationship. Her favorite flower was peony. His was whatever was blooming. They had their first kiss under a streetlight in the rain after a disastrous attempt at a trendy restaurant that gave them both food poisoning. He loved that she sang off-key in the mornings, and she loved that he left notes on the bathroom mirror. The lies came easier than Brianna expected, maybe because Julian was a good storyteller, or maybe because there was something comfortable about sitting next to him in the dark car, building a fantasy life together. The gala was being held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, because of course it was. Brianna had been there on school field trips, shepherding excited third graders past ancient artifacts and impressionist paintings. She had never arrived through the front entrance in a designer gown with a billionaire's hand on the small of her back. "Remember," Julian murmured as they approached the entrance, "we're in love, or at least falling. My grandmother will be watching everything." "No pressure," Brianna muttered, but she let herself lean into him slightly as they walked up the steps. The museum had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. White flowers cascaded from every surface, string quartets played in corners, and servers circulated with champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. The crowd was exactly what Brianna expected, elegant, polished, and wearing more money in jewelry than she made in a decade. "Julian." A woman's voice cut through the murmur of conversation, sharp and commanding despite its warmth. Julian York was petite and silver-haired, with Julian's same honey-colored eyes and a posture that suggested military training. She wore a midnight blue gown and looked like the kind of woman who could negotiate world peace before breakfast and still have energy to redecorate the house. "Grandmother." Julian bent to kiss her cheek, and the affection between them was palpable. "I would like you to meet Brianna Walsh." Eleanor turned her full attention to Brianna, and it felt like being examined under a microscope. "So you're the one who has finally captured my grandson's attention. He has been remarkably secretive about you." "I prefer to keep my private life private," Brianna said, hoping her voice sounded steady. "And Julian has been respectful of that. A teacher, I understand. 3rd grade. I work in Brooklyn." "My late husband believed education was the foundation of civilization," Eleanor said, still studying her. "Tell me, what made you decide to teach such young children?" This, at least, Brianna did not have to fake. "Because that is when you can still make them believe they can do anything, before the world tells them otherwise. Every September, I get a classroom full of kids who think they can become astronauts or artists or presidents, and my job is to give them the tools to try." Something shifted in Eleanor's expression. The scrutiny softened into something that might have been approval. "And what do you think of my grandson?" Brianna glanced at Julian, who was watching her with an intensity that made her stomach flip. She had prepared for this question, had practiced her answer in the mirror while putting on mascara. But standing there under the crystal chandeliers with Eleanor's knowing gaze on her face, the rehearsed words evaporated. "I think he's one of the most genuine people I have met in a long time," she heard herself say. "In a world full of people trying to be impressive, Julian just tries to be good. That is rare." Julian's hand found hers, and he squeezed gently. She squeezed back, reminding herself this was all part of the performance. Eleanor smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I like you, Brianna Walsh. Come, let me introduce you around. Julian, your board members are waiting to speak with you about the new factory plans." "I am stealing your girlfriend." Before Brianna could protest, Eleanor had linked her arm through hers and was steering her away from Julian into the crowd. She glanced back once and saw him watching them go with something that looked like concern, or perhaps amusement. Then she was being swept into a whirlwind of introductions. Eleanor introduced her to philanthropists and politicians, artists and activists. Brianna shook hands until her wrist ached and made small talk about everything from modern art to urban education policy. To her surprise, she found herself actually enjoying most of the conversations. These were not all shallow socialites. Many of them were genuinely passionate about their causes, and several were interested in her perspective on education funding. "You are good at this," Eleanor said during a brief lull. They stood near a gallery of impressionist paintings, champagne glasses in hand. "At what? Being yourself. So many young women in your position would try to be who they think we want them to be. You just are who you are." Eleanor took a sip of her champagne. "Julian needs that. He has spent too much of his life trying to be what others expect." Guilt twisted in Brianna's stomach. She was literally here pretending to be Julian's girlfriend for money. She was the definition of being fake. "I care about him," she said, which felt like the closest she could get to honesty. "I can see that. I can also see that he cares about you, though I suspect he has not fully admitted it to himself yet." Eleanor's knowing look made Brianna's cheeks warm. "My grandson has been lonely for a long time. His parents' death changed him, made him cautious. But when he looks at you, I see something I have not seen in years. Hope." Before Brianna could respond, Julian appeared at her elbow. "Grandmother, you are monopolizing my date." "Someone has to make sure she is good enough for you," Eleanor said, but she was grinning. "Go, dance. Let an old woman watch young people be foolishly in love." Julian led Brianna onto the dance floor as the orchestra began a waltz. His hand settled on her waist and she rested her fingers on his shoulder, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. "How did it go?" he asked quietly as they began to move. "Your grandmother is terrifying." "I know. What did she say?" "That you have been lonely." "That I am good for you." Brianna met his eyes. She really loves you. I know, he said again, softer this time. That is why all of this feels so terrible. She's happy because she thinks I have finally found someone and it is all a lie. They turned across the floor, moving in sync despite never having danced together before. Brianna was not a great dancer, but Julian led with easy confidence, making her feel graceful. Maybe it does not have to be, she said before she could stop herself. Julian's step faltered slightly. What do you mean? I mean, maybe your grandmother is right that you have been too cautious. Maybe you have been so worried about people wanting your money that you have not let anyone get close enough to want you. She was speaking too freely, she knew, but the champagne and the strangeness of the evening had loosened her tongue. For what it is worth, I think you are kind of great, money aside. His honey-colored eyes searched her face. You do not even know me. I know you love your grandmother enough to go through this elaborate charade to make her happy. I know you built a company around sustainable materials because you think we have a responsibility to the planet. I know you have been making small jokes all evening to help me feel less nervous, even though you are probably more nervous than I am. That is enough to know you are decent. The music swelled around them, and for a moment they just stared at each other, still moving across the floor. Then Julian smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. You are not what I expected, Brianna Walsh. What did you expect? Someone who would go through the motions, take the money, and leave. Not someone who would see through me so easily. Is that what I am doing? Yes. He pulled her slightly closer, and Brianna felt her breath catch. And it is absolutely terrifying. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and champagne, stolen glances and casual touches that felt increasingly less casual. Julian kept his hand on her back or her arm, small points of contact that made her skin hum with awareness. She caught him watching her several times when he thought she was not paying attention, his expression unguarded and almost wondering. When the gala finally ended, they said goodbye to Alina, who hugged Brianna tightly and whispered, "Take care of him," in her ear. Then they were back in the car, the city lights streaming past as they headed toward Brooklyn. You were perfect tonight, Julian said, breaking the comfortable silence. I just told the truth, mostly. That is what made it perfect. He hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. Your payment as agreed. Brianna took the envelope but did not open it. It felt heavy in her hands, weighted with more than just a check. Julian, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you really think you will never be able to trust someone enough to date them for real? He was quiet for a long moment. I do not know. Tonight was the first time in years I forgot to question someone's motives. But that is only because I knew exactly what your motives were. There's a strange freedom in that. And if I said I would go out with you again, without the contract or the payment, just because I wanted to see if this thing between us is real. The words tumbled out before her courage failed. The car pulled up in front of her building. Julian turned to face her fully, and in the dim light, she could see the war playing out across his features. Want versus fear, hope versus caution. I would say you are probably the bravest person I have ever met, he said quietly. And that I have not stopped thinking about dancing with you since the music stopped. Brianna's heart hammered against her ribs. So, is that a yes? It is a terrified yes. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. Can I call you tomorrow? You had better. She leaned in, and he met her halfway, and the kiss was soft and sweet and tasted like champagne and possibility. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. Good night, Brianna Walsh. Good night, Julian York. She floated up to her apartment, still wearing the borrowed gown and a grin she could not suppress. The envelope sat unopened on her kitchen counter while she got ready for bed, and it was only when she was brushing her teeth that she remembered to check it. Inside was a check for $10,000 as promised. But there was also a note in elegant handwriting. "Thank you for the best evening I have had in years. Dinner tomorrow, somewhere without champagne or photographers, just us. J." She fell asleep with the note on her nightstand and her phone next to her pillow, waiting. Julian called at 9 the next morning. Brianna answered on the second ring, still in her pajamas with toothpaste on her chin. "Hi. Hi." She could hear the smile in his voice. "Did I wake you?" "No, I have been up for hours." A lie. She had been up for 20 minutes, grading papers, on a Sunday morning. "Welcome to a teacher's life," he laughed, and the sound made her chest warm. "Are you free tonight? I know a place in the village, tiny Italian restaurant, family-owned. Best carbonara in the city, and absolutely zero chance we will run into anyone from last night." That sounds perfect. They talked for almost an hour, about nothing and everything. He told her about growing up as an only child with parents who were always traveling for work, about how his grandmother had essentially raised him. She told him about her sister and her parents who had retired to Florida, about the kids in her classroom, and the small victories that made her job worthwhile. It was easy and comfortable, and when they finally hung up, Brianna realized she had been smiling so hard her cheeks ached. Carmen called approximately 30 seconds later. Well, what? Do not play coy with me, Brianna Marie Walsh. How was the gala? Did you survive? Did you get your money? It was good. I got the money, and I have a date with him tonight." Silence. Then, "Excuse me." Brianna curled up on her couch, hugging a pillow. "I know how it sounds, but Carmen, there is something there. He is not what I expected at all. He is kind and funny and lonely, and when he looks at me, I feel like I am the only person in the world. Bree, sweetie, you need to be careful. He is a billionaire, and you are you. Those worlds do not mix. Maybe they can. Maybe I need to believe they can." That evening, Brianna changed her outfit 4 times before settling on jeans and a soft blue sweater. If they were doing this for real, she needed to be herself, not some dressed-up version she could not maintain. She wore her hair down and minimal makeup, and when Julian arrived to pick her up, his face lit up in a way that made her decision feel right. "You look beautiful," he said. "You are wearing jeans." She gestured at his casual outfit. "I have never seen you in jeans." "I can dress down when the occasion calls for it. Come on, I am starving." The restaurant was exactly as he described. Small and warm, with checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in wine bottles. The owner greeted Julian like an old friend and showed them to a corner table near the back. No cameras, no crowds, just the gentle murmur of other diners and the smell of garlic and fresh bread. "How did you find this place?" Brianna asked, studying the menu. "My parents used to bring me here when I was a kid, before they died. It is one of my favorite memories, the 3 of us crammed around a table, my mother trying to teach me Italian while my father made terrible jokes. After they were gone, I did not come back for years. But eventually I realized that avoiding the places we had been happy did not honor them. It just made me lonelier." Brianna reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you for bringing me here. Thank you for agreeing to come. I am still not entirely sure this is not a dream." They ordered wine and pasta, and the conversation flowed as easily as it had on the phone. Julian asked about her students, and she told him about Miguel, who had struggled with reading all year until suddenly something clicked, and he devoured every book she gave him. She asked about his company, and he talked about the new factory they were planning that would employ 200 people and produce building materials with a carbon-negative footprint. "You really care about this," she observed. "It is not just about the money. My grandfather built York Industries from nothing, and my father expanded it. But they were always so focused on growth and profit that they never asked what we were growing toward or who we were profiting at the expense of. When I took over, I wanted to do something that mattered. Money is meaningless if you are not using it to make things better. That is what your grandmother meant when she said you try to be good. He looked at her, eyes intense in the candlelight. Do you really think that I am good? I think you are trying very hard to be, which is even better. Good is not something you are. It is something you practice. The owner brought them tiramisu to share, and they traded bites and stories until the restaurant began to empty around them. It was nearly 11 when they finally left, and Julian suggested a walk through Washington Square Park. The night was cool, spring edging toward summer. Street performers played music near the fountain, and students from NYU sprawled on benches studying or laughing with friends. Julian took her hand as they walked, and Brianna marveled at how natural it felt, as if they had been doing this for years instead of hours. "Can I confess something?" Julian said as they paused near the fountain. "Always. I have been thinking about you constantly since we met. Not just tonight, but yesterday too. When I first saw you at your door, my first thought was not about the gala or my grandmother. It was that you had the most incredible eyes I had ever seen." Brianna's breath caught. "You are very smooth, Julian York." "I am really not. I am actually terrible at this. Ask anyone I have ever attempted to date. I overthink everything and self-sabotage and generally make a mess of things. But with you, I do not want to do that. I want to be brave." "Then be brave." He kissed her again, longer this time, one hand cupping her face while the other pulled her close. She melted into him, aware of nothing but the warmth of his mouth and the steady beat of his heart against hers. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Come home with me," he said, then immediately shook his head. "No, sorry, that was too forward. I just meant I do not want this night to end." Brianna surprised herself. "Show me where you live." His apartment was in Tribeca, of course, a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. It was decorated simply, all clean lines and comfortable furniture, with bookshelves covering one entire wall and photographs scattered throughout. Not the cold showpiece she had expected, but a real home. "You read science fiction," she said, examining his bookshelf. "Guilty. I was a nerdy kid, still am really." She pulled out a worn paperback. "I teach this book to my students. Well, a simplified version." "Really?" He came to stand beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne. "What do they think?" "That it is amazing, that anything is possible if you are brave enough to imagine it." She turned to face him, kind of like tonight. "Brianna." Her name was almost a prayer on his lips. "I know this is fast, and I know we just met, but I need you to know this is real for me. You are real for me." "It is real for me too, terrifyingly real." They talked until almost dawn, curled up on his couch with the city lights twinkling below them. He told her about the pressure of running a billion-dollar company at 32, about board members who questioned every decision and competitors who would love to see him fail. She told him about students who came to school hungry, about buying supplies with her own money because the budget was never enough, about parents working 3 jobs who still could not make ends meet. "I want to help," he said suddenly. "Your school. What would make the biggest difference?" "Julian, you do not have to do that." "I know I do not have to. I want to. Tell me what you need." She thought about it. "A new library. Ours was flooded last year and we lost almost every book. The kids are making do with my classroom library and whatever we can borrow from the public library, but it is not enough. A proper school library with computers and reading nooks and a real librarian who could help them discover stories. That would change everything. Consider it done." "What?" "No, Julian, that would cost. I do not care what it costs. You just said it would change everything for those kids, so we will make it happen." He pulled her closer. "Let me do this. Let me use some of this ridiculous money for something that actually matters." Brianna kissed him, pouring every ounce of gratitude and affection and growing love into it. When they finally pulled apart, she was crying. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for reminding me why any of this is important." The sun was rising over Manhattan when Julian finally called her a car to take her home. She had school in a few hours and he had an early meeting. But standing at his door, neither of them wanted to say goodbye. "When can I see you again?" he asked. "Tomorrow. I could make dinner." "Fair warning, my apartment is about the size of your closet. I do not care if it is the size of a shoebox. I will be there." The next few weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing connection. Julian showed up at her school unannounced one afternoon, sitting in the back of her classroom and watching her teach with an expression of open wonder. She went to a York Industries Board meeting and charmed his skeptical executives with her straightforward questions and genuine interest. They had picnics in Central Park and movie nights in her tiny apartment. Cooking elaborate dinners that turned into disasters they laughed about while eating takeout instead. Alina invited them to Sunday brunch, and Brianna spent the entire meal convinced she would accidentally reveal the fake beginning of their relationship. But Alina just smiled knowingly and told stories about Julian as a child, showing Brianna baby pictures that made him groan with embarrassment. "I like seeing him like this," Alina said when Julian stepped away to take a phone call. "Happy. You have given him something I could not, Brianna. You have given him permission to be himself." "He has given me that too," Brianna admitted. "I spent so long thinking I had to be satisfied with the small life I built, but Julian makes me believe I can want more without being selfish. Wanting more is never selfish, dear girl. It is human." 1 month turned into 2, and Brianna realized she was completely, irrevocably in love with Julian York. She loved the way he left notes for her hidden around her apartment. She loved how he listened when she talked about her students, remembering their names and asking about their progress. She loved his terrible singing voice and his competitiveness at board games, and the way he looked at her like she was the answer to a question he had been asking his whole life. The new library was completed in early July, and the school held a small dedication ceremony. Julian insisted on staying in the background, but Brianna pulled him forward when the principal asked to thank their anonymous donor. "This is Julian York," she said, her hand tight in his. "And he is the reason our students will have the resources they deserve." The teachers and parents applauded, and several kids rushed forward to hug Julian, who looked overwhelmed and delighted in equal measure. Afterward, as they walked through the new space with its bright colors and thousands of books and cozy reading corners, Brianna felt her eyes fill with tears again. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever done for me," she said. "It is not for you. It is for them." He gestured at the kids already exploring the shelves. "But I would build 100 libraries if it made you look at me like that." That evening, Julian cooked dinner at his apartment, an ambitious attempt at Thai food that resulted in enough leftovers to feed them for a week. They ate on the balcony, watching the sun set over the Hudson River, and Brianna thought about how strange and wonderful life was, how a fake date could turn into the realest thing she had ever experienced. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could second-guess them. Julian went very still. Then he set down his fork and turned to her, his honey-colored eyes bright. "Say that again." "I love you, Julian. I know it is fast and probably crazy, but I love you." "It is not crazy, or maybe it is, but I do not care because I love you too." He pulled her into his lap, holding her tight. I have loved you since that first dance, maybe even before. I have just been too scared to say it. And now I am still scared, but I am more scared of losing you. So yes, Brianna Walsh, I love you. I love your passion and your laugh and the way you see good in everyone. I love how you cry at commercials and sing off-key and never let me get away with taking myself too seriously. I love you, and I want everyone to know it. They kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon, and Brianna felt like she was glowing from the inside out. This was what she had been missing, what she had not even known to look for. Not just love, but this love, specific and fierce and completely transformative. August brought a heat wave that made the city feel like a sauna. Julian whisked her away to his family's summer house in the Hamptons, a sprawling beachfront property that was somehow both elegant and comfortable. They spent lazy days swimming and reading on the beach, and evenings cooking together and playing cards with Alina, who had decided to join them for a week. One night, after Alina had gone to bed, Julian and Brianna sat on the back porch watching the waves roll in. The air smelled like salt and night-blooming jasmine, and the moon painted silver streaks across the water. "I need to tell you something," Julian said, his voice serious. Brianna's heart lurched. "Okay. That first night, the gala, it was supposed to be fake, a business transaction. But the truth is, I think part of me knew even then that it would not stay fake. When I saw you at your door, something just clicked. Like, oh, there you are. I have been waiting for you. Why are you telling me this now?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Brianna's breath stopped. "Because I do not want to wait anymore. Because life is short and uncertain, and the only thing I am sure of is that I want to spend the rest of mine making you happy." He slid off the bench and onto one knee, opening the box to reveal a stunning ring, an emerald surrounded by diamonds that caught the moonlight. "Brianna Walsh, will you marry me?" She was crying and laughing and nodding all at once. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and the waves kept rolling in like they had been doing for millions of years, witnessing another small miracle of two people choosing each other. Alina came out onto the porch in her bathrobe. "Did I hear squealing?" "We are engaged," Brianna said, holding up her hand. Alina's face crumpled with joy. "Oh, my darling boy. My darling girl." She pulled them both into a hug. "I knew from that first night, I knew you were the one." "Actually," Julian said, glancing at Brianna, "about that first night, we need to tell you something." Brianna's eyes went wide. They had never discussed confessing the truth, but Julian seemed determined and she loved him for it. "That night was supposed to be fake," he continued. "I hired Brianna to pretend to be my girlfriend because I thought it was what you needed to see. But it stopped being pretend before the night even ended. Every moment since has been real. I am sorry for lying to you, grandmother. You deserved better." Alina was quiet for a long moment. Then she started laughing, a deep, delighted sound. "Oh, Julian, I knew." "What? Did you really think I could not tell? I have known you since you were born. I knew you were up to something the moment you told me you had been secretly dating someone for months. But I also saw the way you looked at Brianna, the way she looked at you, and I knew that whatever had started as a lie had become truth." She patted his cheek. "I am just glad you finally admitted it. You are not angry. I am delighted. You were so busy trying to protect yourself that you forgot how to take risks. Brianna made you remember. That is worth any number of small deceptions." She kissed them both on the forehead. "Now, shall we start planning a wedding?" They were married in October, in the small church where Julian's parents had been married. Brianna wore a simple white dress with a train that her sister helped her carry, and Julian cried when he saw her walking down the aisle. Alina sat in the front row beaming, and Carmen served as maid of honor, whispering, "I told you so," during the vows. The reception was held at the York estate, a beautiful old house upstate that had been in the family for generations. They danced under string lights, surrounded by friends and family, and Brianna thought about that first dance at the gala when they were both pretending. This was so much better, real and messy and perfect. "Happy," Julian murmured, holding her close as they swayed to their song, deliriously. "Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making you even happier." "That is a big promise, Mr. York." "I am a man of big promises, Mrs. York." She kissed him, tasting champagne and joy and forever. They honeymooned in Italy. 2 weeks of exploring ancient cities and eating too much pasta and making love in hotel rooms with windows open to the sound of church bells. When they returned, they moved into a brownstone in Brooklyn that was big enough for both of them but still closed to Brianna's school. She continued teaching, and Julian adjusted his schedule to have dinner with her most nights. They hosted Sunday dinners for leaner and game nights for friends, and slowly built a life that felt like home. A year after their wedding, Brianna found out she was pregnant. She told Julian by leaving a positive test in a box wrapped like a birthday present, even though it was not his birthday. He opened it at breakfast, stared at it for a full minute, then picked her up and spun her around the kitchen, both of them laughing and crying. Their daughter was born in the spring, a tiny perfect thing with Brianna's blonde hair and Julian's honey eyes. They named her Alina Rose, and she had her great-grandmother's fierce personality from the start. Alina the elder held her great-granddaughter and cried tears of pure joy. "You have given me the world," she told Julian and Brianna. "Both of you. Everything I could have hoped for and more." She passed away peacefully in her sleep 6 months later, and while they mourned, there was also gratitude. She had lived to see Julian happy, settled, deeply in love. She had held her great-granddaughter and told stories about the York family history. She had gone knowing that the legacy she cared about most, the legacy of love and family, would continue. At her funeral, Julian stood at the podium and talked about her strength and wisdom, about how she had raised him and guided him and never given up on him finding happiness. "She told me once that the only thing that matters in the end is who you loved and who loved you back. Grandmother, you were loved. By me, by Brianna, by everyone here. And you taught us all how to love better." Years passed in the beautiful mundane way that happy lives do. Alina Rose started school, and Brianna taught her to read while Julian taught her to play chess. They had a son 2 years later, a wild, joyful boy they named Benjamin. The brownstone filled with laughter and toys and the chaos of family life. York Industries continued to grow, building green factories across the country and employing thousands. Julian endowed a scholarship program for first-generation college students, and Brianna started a nonprofit connecting schools in underserved areas with donors who wanted to make a difference. On their 10th anniversary, they returned to the restaurant in the village where they had their first real date. It looked exactly the same, checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles, the owner greeting them like old friends. "I cannot believe it has been 10 years, Brianna said, reaching across the table for Julian's hand. "Best 10 years of my life. Even the terrible parts, the morning sickness and the sleepless nights and the time Benjamin flushed your watch down the toilet, especially those parts. Because we survived them together." He kissed her knuckles. "You know what I was thinking about today?" "What?" "That first night. How I was so convinced I needed someone fake, someone who would not complicate my life. Thank God I was wrong," Brianna laughed. "Thank God you are a terrible judge of what you need. The worst. Lucky for me, I found someone who is very good at showing me." They toasted with wine, and Brianna looked at her husband across the table, this man who had started as a stranger and become her entire world. His hair had a few gray strands now, and there were lines around his eyes from smiling, but he was still the same person who had looked at her with wonder on a dance floor 10 years ago, still the man who tried every day to be good. "I would do it all again," she said. "Every moment. Even the fake parts. They were never really fake, though, were they? Not where it mattered. No, not where it mattered." They walked home through Brooklyn, hand in hand like always, and Brianna thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. A desperate request from a friend, a single evening of pretending, a connection neither of them had expected. It had seemed so impossible at the start, a teacher and a billionaire, two different worlds colliding. But love did not care about worlds or expectations, or what made sense on paper. Love just was, messy and miraculous and completely transformative. She had agreed to fake date a billionaire for one evening, unaware the pretend would become so real it would reshape her entire life. And now, a decade later, surrounded by the life they had built together, Brianna could not imagine any other path. This was where she was meant to be, exactly who she was meant to become. "I love you," she said, the same words she had spoken that first time on his balcony, but layered now with years of meaning. "I love you too," Julian replied, his voice warm with contentment. "Today, tomorrow, always." And that was the truest thing either of them had ever said.